The salvage operation that's been ongoing in the Potomac River has yielded something, you could say, interesting. The black box belonging to the American Airlines jet. However, instead of just settling what took place, the black box, if anything else, actually created more of a mystery in regards to what led up to the crash. And the reason why that is because the black box creates a discrepancy between what the onboard data was showing versus what the air control tower was showing. Let me explain. And for posterity's sake, I will quickly summarize what we know thus far happened. On the evening of Wednesday, January 29th, at about 9 p.m., when the sky was perfectly clear to fly, a crash occurred in the skies above Washington, D.C. On the one hand, you had an Army Black Hawk helicopter with 3 soldiers on board flying a routine annual proficiency training flight. According to the new head of the Pentagon, the purpose of that training was to practice routes that are used to evacuate key government officials if needed during an attack or a major catastrophe. It was basically a continuation of government extraction plan. On the other hand, though, you had American Airlines Flight 5342 coming in from Wichita, Kansas, carrying 64 people and descending to land in the Reagan Airport along a known landing route. However, what wound up happening is that the two of them crashed into each other, fell into the freezing Potomac River, and very sadly, everyone on both vehicles did not survive. And so now the question becomes, why exactly did this happen? According to the government officials who are leading the investigation into the crash, at the time of the crash, the DC control tower recorded the Black Hawk helicopter to be flying at an altitude of 200 feet above the ground, which is worth mentioning is perfectly in line with the maximum allowed altitude for its flight path, meaning that according to the tower, the helicopter was well within its flight parameters. However, the black box recovered from the jet, and for your reference, the black box, it acts as a flight recorder in case of emergency. It stores all the information, and it's pretty much indestructible. It can get damaged, but it will keep the data on hand. And the black box, it shows that the collision, it occurred at 325 feet, plus or minus 25 feet, which is obviously a big discrepancy. Even if you take the lowest range of that black box reading, the helicopter was about 100 feet above where it should have been, but also, more importantly, it was 100 feet above where the control tower claims that it was at the time. Quote, National Transportation Safety Board officials told reporters on February the 1st that preliminary altimeter data did not match the events on the night of the deadly accident. Officials said that the control tower recorded the Black Hawk helicopter flying at an altitude of 200 feet at the time of the collision, in line with its maximum allowed altitude for its flight path. However, data from the passenger jet's flight recorder shows the collision occurred at an altitude of about 325 feet, plus or minus 25 feet. The officials, they then went on to say that they're working to essentially reconcile these differences in altitude, including by refining the tower data, which they claim is less reliable than the black box data. The investigator in charge also added the following, quote, This is a complex investigation. There are a lot of pieces here. Our team is working hard to gather this data. And counted among the causes needing investigation was the fact that the control tower at the time was understaffed significantly when the crash occurred. Quote, Under normal staffing, one air traffic controller is responsible for helicopter traffic while another guides landing and departing planes. However, on Wednesday night, one man was juggling both responsibilities. That's because a supervisor allowed a different air traffic controller to leave before that individual's shift had ended. The investigators went on to say that a preliminary report can be expected in roughly 30 days, while the full report may take upwards of a year to actually compile because there's just so many moving parts. If you want to read the full statement from the National Transportation Safety Board regarding the content of the black box, well, actually, the two black boxes, since the airline jet actually had two of them that were found, but they have the same data on them. Regardless, I'll throw all that down into the description box below this video, which I should mention is that description box right below those like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you take a quick moment to smash. And then let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the 28th Amendment. This is one of those stories that really flew under the radar, and then because of the breakneck speed at which the Trump administration has been operating at, it really just fell through the cracks. But over the weekend, I was looking through my reference notes, and I saw it, and I thought it would be worth at least covering, the 28th Amendment. Now, if you happen to remember civics class, or if you happen to carry a pocket constitution on you at all times, you might notice that currently The U.S. Constitution, officially, only has 27 amendments. However, according to a statement that was made by Joe Biden on his way out the door, that is actually incorrect. According to him, there are actually 28 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Specifically on Friday, January 17th, which I should mention was just 3 days before the transfer of power, Joe Biden released the following statement, quote, "It is long past time to recognize the will of the American people. In keeping with my oath and duty to the Constitution and country, I affirm what I believe and what 3/4 of the states have ratified. The 28th Amendment is the law of the land, guaranteeing all Americans equal rights and protections under the law, regardless of their sex." Now, what he's referring to there is known as the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. As its name would suggest, the ERA would prohibit discrimination based on sex. However, it's not actually law. Instead, at this point, it's a dead proposal. Back in 1972, the Equal Rights Amendment was sent to the states for ratification, with Congress setting a 7-year deadline for the necessary number of state legislatures to ratify the amendment. However, that never happened. By the deadline, only 35 states had ratified the amendment, which was 3 states short of the necessary 38 states for that amendment to actually become official. At that point, Congress extended the deadline to 1982, adding an additional 3 years. But by 1982, no new states had ratified the amendment, and therefore the whole effort was dead. However, there were always some legal theorists who believed that Congress actually did not have the authority to set a deadline for the ratification process, even though technically the U.S. Supreme Court has affirmed that Congress can set such deadlines. These legal theorists believed that they can't. And so you had feminist activists continue to push forward the ERA even after the deadline passed. And eventually their efforts proved successful. In 2017, the Nevada state legislature ratified the amendment. In 2018, the Illinois state legislature ratified the amendment. And then, in January of 2020, Virginia ratified the amendment as well, becoming the 38th state to do so. However, obviously, Virginia did it much later than the deadline allowed for, and so at the time, nothing happened. In fact, in 2020, after Virginia ratified the amendment, the National Archivist released a statement saying that they officially declined to certify the 28th Amendment as the law of the land. And for your reference, the National Archivist is the person responsible for making constitutional amendments official. And all the way back then, in 2020, the National Archivist cited a legal opinion from the Department of Justice, and they wrote the following, quote, "The ratification deadline established by Congress for the ERA is valid and enforceable. The Office of Legal Counsel concluded that extending or removing the deadline requires new action by Congress or the courts. Court decisions at both the district and circuit levels have affirmed that the ratification deadlines established by Congress for the ERA are valid. Therefore, the Archivist of the United States cannot legally publish the Equal Rights Amendment. As the leaders of the National Archives, we will abide by these legal precedents and support the constitutional framework in which we operate." Now, this was, again, a statement that was released all the way back in the year 2020. And after it was released, most people had just forgotten about the whole thing. That was, of course, up until the middle of January, when seemingly out of nowhere, Joe Biden made a statement saying that, quote, "The 28th Amendment is the law of the land." And I should mention that Kamala Harris released a parallel statement basically saying the same thing, that she also believes that the 28th Amendment is the law of the land. Now, one question would obviously be, why did it take them 4 years from 2020 when it was passed by Virginia to 2025 to actually make that statement? But that's besides the point. The National Archivist came out once again after Joe Biden made that statement, and he said that there will be no change to the U.S. Constitution. And also, just as a matter of process, it's worth mentioning that the president has no role whatsoever in the constitutional amendment process, and so his view carries technically no weight. It's essentially just his opinion. If you'd like to read more about the ERA, I'll throw several of my research links down into the description box below. I just wanted to mention the story because it was interesting, and when I saw it, I'm like, oh, maybe some people forgot that it happened, or maybe they heard about it and they're wondering, like, what happened with that? Did the ERA actually get passed? Is there a 28th Amendment? The answer is no. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Listen, it's obvious that the financial system is not looking too great. After being pumped up with trillions of virtually free government dollars for many, many years now, well, the stock bubble might actually burst in the near future. And in that process, unfortunately, it could take away the nest egg of anyone who happens to be exposed to it. And so consider taking this opportunity to diversify into something which is beyond the grasp of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, physical gold and silver. And the best company to use, in my opinion, is the sponsor of today's episode, American Hartford Gold, who, I should mention, is also my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. And besides myself, they have thousands of 5-star reviews from other Americans, and they also have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And working with them is rather simple. They have a huge selection of coins, bars, and rounds to choose from. They have super friendly staff who you can call, and they can set up either gold delivery directly to your doorstep, or they can even set you up in a gold IRA. And then lastly, best of all, if you tell them the Roman sent you, they will throw in a free gold coin with your first qualifying purchase. So give them a call. The number is 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352. Or you can simply text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw a link to their webpage. It'll be down there in the description box below. And now, switching once again, you might have noticed that egg prices have really gone through the roof. In fact, I took this footage here myself over in Brooklyn, and the eggs that would normally cost, let's say like $5, $6, or $7 are now costing upwards of $10 or $11. And that's if you can even find them. Some stores are just reportedly completely out of eggs. And the main reason at least, has to do with a bird flu epidemic. Georgia is an excellent case study of what's happening on a national scale. About 3 weeks ago, chicken farmers over in the state of Georgia, they were hit with some devastating news. They woke up one Sunday morning to find out that the Georgia Department of Agriculture suspended all poultry activities in the entirety of the state until further notice. Here's specifically what the commissioner of Georgia State Agriculture Department said in a statement all the way back in the tail end of January. Quote, "For the first time since the ongoing nationwide outbreak began in 2022, HPAI has been confirmed in a commercial poultry operation in the state of Georgia. This is a serious threat to Georgia's #1 industry and the livelihoods of thousands of Georgians who make their living in our state's poultry industry. We're working around the clock to mitigate any further spread of the disease and ensure that normal poultry activities in Georgia can resume as quickly as possible." However, unfortunately for these poultry farmers, that work is still ongoing to this very day, which is now over 3 weeks later. The homepage for Georgia's Department of Agriculture, it displays a big message at the very top, which reads as follows, quote, "Avian influenza notice. All poultry exhibitions, shows, swaps, meets, and sales in the state of Georgia are suspended until further notice." Now, just as the Agriculture Commissioner mentioned in that statement that I read to you, there was a poultry plant over in Elbert County, Georgia. And Elbert County, for reference, is located in the northeastern part of the state. And that plant, it confirmed a positive case of HPAI, which stands for highly pathogenic avian influenza, otherwise known as the bird flu. It's highly contagious among birds, and it can even jump species, going into cats, cows, and even humans. In fact, just in the early part of last month, in January, you had a 65-year-old from Louisiana die because of bird flu. Now, he had many comorbidities, but his main cause of death was, in fact, bird flu. And so, being such a serious concern, this one positive case in Elbert County set off a chain reaction. Here's a timeline of how it played itself out. On Wednesday, January 15th, the producer in Elbert County noticed that their flock was showing the possible clinical signs of bird flu. By the next morning, which was Thursday morning, samples were collected and sent over to the Georgia Poultry Laboratory Network for testing. Within a few hours, the Georgia lab confirmed the positive HPAI diagnosis. This was then further confirmed the next day, which was Friday, when the USDA's national laboratory also confirmed that the stock in Elbert County was positive for avian flu. And so on that same day, when you had that double confirmation from the state and national labs, the Georgia Department of Agriculture's emergency response teams, they were deployed to this plant in Elbert County in order to clean, disinfect, kill, and dispose of the affected birds. Furthermore, all commercial poultry operations within a 6.2-mile radius of that plant were placed under immediate quarantine and have been undergoing surveillance and testing for a period of now already 3 weeks. But unfortunately, the outbreak did expand. By January 22nd, local authorities detected a second case of bird flu at another poultry farm in Elbert County, Georgia. This one was only about a mile away from the first farm that had the detection. This then forced the statewide quarantine to continue up until the present day, Subsequently, it led the price of eggs to skyrocket to where they are now, and it led some unscrupulous individuals to try to pull off insane heists, trying to steal roughly 100,000 eggs. If you'd like to read more about what's happening over in Georgia, I'll throw several links down into the description box below if you're the type of person that likes to dig into the weeds. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.